All right, here's a story, and it's one that I never do. Let me explain. When someone sends me an email and they say, well, I've already submitted this to so-and-so, 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 and I'm submitting it to you right now, I usually just delete the email. None of us out here who do this want to duplicate stories. So that's a little hint for people. If you've already submitted your story to another channel and they've done it, especially if they've done it, or even if they haven't done it, you picked who you wanted to send it to and leave it at that. Don't send it to me. That's not really fair. I know people want to get their story heard all over the place, but it's, anyway, it kind of annoys me is what I'm saying. And when I see that, I delete them. However, this story that I'm about to share with you was actually shared on another channel. It was shared on, or narrated on Carrie Arnold's channel, The Shudder. He did a storytelling channel at one time. During the COVID shutdown, he didn't have much to do. He wasn't working. He actually called me and he said, I want to do this. I'm like, you should do it. You've got a great voice and you read really well and you should be able to do it. Just in honor of Carrie, I wanted to redo this story. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good story. The title of the story is 12 Big Creature. It's written by Daniel McCall. And this was posted on Facebook, so I'm assuming he posted it on his Facebook channel under his name, so I don't mind saying his full name because he's taking full credit for this. He writes, my maternal grandfather, D. Calvin Howell, was born in Jefferson County, Florida in 1886 and grew up in, I can't pronounce this town name, Wacissa, W-A-C-I-S-S-A, and the Cody area, hunting, fishing, and roaming the local woods. When, as a teenage boy, he was old enough to go to work, he began working in logging camps, which were all deep in the woods, accessible only by rail that was laid to access and haul out the timber. He was an excellent woodsman, he was a hunter, and he was an expert with firearms. It was generally well known in the area that the men of the Howell family would not back down from a confrontation. Calvin Howell was not a big man, but in that respect, he was very much like the rest of his Howell relatives. He married my grandmother in 1912 and continued working and living in logging camps until 1929, when his employer, Standard Lumber Company, went broke as a result of the stock market crash and left him and his family stranded in a logging camp in Lafayette County, Florida. When he managed to get his family out of the logging camp, he became a sharecropper farmer in the area of Mayo, Lafayette County, Florida in 1938, when he bought his own farm in Leon County, Florida. He died in 1951 when I was 13 years old. A few months after my grandfather died, I came to live with my grandmother, and I lived with her until I graduated from high school and joined the Army in 1955. When I was growing up, one of the family stories I heard from my mother and grandmother was about an encounter my grandfather had one night during the years that he was sharecropping in Lafayette County. This was during the Great Depression, and the family was struggling to survive. Their only means of transportation was a mule and a wagon, or walking. One night, my grandfather was walking home from a place I no longer remember. It was after dark, but it was a clear night, and there was enough light from the moon or the stars for him to be able to see the road for a little way ahead. He was walking along a dirt road in a wooded area that was sparsely populated with no houses. When he approached an intersection in the dirt road, he saw what appeared to him to be a large man standing erect and silent in the intersection. He couldn't see it well enough to tell if it was a big man or something else. Being a lifelong woodsman and hunter, he was well aware of all the animals that lived in the area, including the black bear. He was also aware of all the domestic animals which at that time were allowed to roam free on the open range. And he knew most, if not all, of the men who lived in the area, but he didn't know anyone that large. In the darkness, He could not identify this person or animal or creature or object standing in the intersection. He couldn't pass through the intersection without walking close to the unidentified man or object in the intersection. Being very apprehensive about approaching an unknown person or animal under those circumstances, he stopped 20 yards short of the intersection and challenged what he thought was probably a large man to identify himself, and he received no response. After challenging the man or the creature several more times and receiving no response, he eventually said something to the effect of, "You're going to speak up now or I'm going to shoot you." After receiving no response once again, he fired 2 shots from his Smith & Wesson .38 Special revolver into the center chest area of the object. Considering his expertise with the revolver and the close range, it is not likely that he missed his mark. After he shot the creature, it moved off into the woods in an upright position without making a sound. After a few minutes, my grandfather continued on his way home. The next morning, he and others, who were all well armed, went back to the intersection in the daylight to find the creature or at least find its tracks and determine what it was. They didn't find the creature, nor did they identify any tracks. No man or animal was ever reported as having been shot or seen at that time and location. Could this have been a bear? Maybe, but there are some things that seem to indicate that it was not a bear. He was a woodsman, and my grandfather knew what black bears look like. And also, a black bear will generally run away when approached and verbally challenged by a human. It's also unlikely that a black bear would walk away on his hind legs after being shot twice in the chest by a .38 Special. Normally, in either case, a black bear would run away on all 4 legs. The creature was never identified, and the mystery was never solved. Recent stories about people's encounters with Bigfoot-type creatures made me remember the story and wonder if it may be what my grandfather encountered back in the 1930s. I was allowed to begin hunting squirrels with a single-shot .22 when I was 10 years old, and I grew to love hunting wood ducks and turkeys and deer, and I hunted them until 2014. During the 60-plus years that I hunted in North Florida, I never saw an animal or a track that I could not identify. I did hear an occasional strange noise, but I attributed those to hogs that were always in the areas where I hunted. I wish I had asked many questions and written down the story back when I first heard it. I was young and thought I would remember everything. And that's the end of the story. And again, this story has been recorded before. Kerry Arnold did it on his channel, The Shudder. There'll be a link in the description. And I miss Kerry Arnold. I did this story kind of in his honor. It's not a big tribute to Kerry. But when I saw at the end that the man had said he sent it to Kerry and Kerry did it on his channel, it just felt right to do it. So there you have it. Just a quick announcement here. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I released a video called Barely Dead. It is a story written by Jeff Crawford, who is he's just a great author. He's got such a wonderful imagination, and he's not really a horror writer, but he writes westerns and dramas and literary fiction, and he's just a great author, but he does a great job with horror stuff. He's written a sequel to Barely Dead. A lot of people ask for it. Lindsay wound up in limbo there at the end of the story, and you're kind of wondering, what happened to Lindsay? Well, this is the sequel to the story. The next thing I want to tell you is on October 20th, we're going to release the second book in the Wild Hunt series by D.A. Roberts. It's called Curse of the Wendigo. It's about 6 or 8 hours long, I can't remember, but I'm getting it ready to launch on October 20. And it'll run there'll be a part every day for 6 or 7 days. I haven't chopped it up yet and put it into podcasts yet, but it's 16 or 17 chapters, just as good or better than Odin's Call. So mark your calendar, October 20. If If you have the little bell thing clicked and you're subscribed, you'll get a notification when it comes up. We'll drop one episode of 2 chapters every day for 6 or 8 days, and that'll take us into Halloween. And that'll give me time to finish up the Steve Lilly, put the finishing touches on Steve Lilly, and launch it the following week. So I'm excited about that. All right, let's get back to these stories. All right, here we go. The writer's name is Jim. He claims the story is true, and the topic is Bigfoot. When I was 9, my sister and I, along with 2 of our aunts who were our age, decided to explore a concrete ditch that ran alongside my great-grandmother's house near Memphis. We used a rope to propel down, and then walked along until we came to a culvert. We looked inside but couldn't see daylight from the other end, just a black, empty space. I wanted to explore this cave-like structure and maybe get a good scare on the girls at the same time. As kids will do, I dared them to go in to see who would go the farthest or stay the longest. They dared me back, and with pride on the line and no one wanting to be the one who chickened out, we all stepped inside. The eerie feeling we all had was overpowering. I was certain the girls wouldn't last long in this environment, and I would surely win. After 50 yards, one of my aunts said, "Jim, what's that?" I looked deeper into the darkness and I saw a set of glowing red eyes walking in our direction. I reasoned that it must be a cat or a dog and that the eyes were catching the light from the opening behind us. But I also knew that if I made it out to be bigger than it was, the girls would run and I'd win. I was done exploring this place anyway. I just needed to turn the fear up a little bit, and I would be the victor. It was working. The closer the eyes got, the more frightening they became. And then I noticed that whatever was connected to those eyes was getting bigger and bigger. I think it was on all fours at first, and then it began to stand up. Okay, I thought, dogs and cats don't walk on 2 legs. That was when my sister and aunts gave up the ghost. They spun around and they ran screaming from the cave, yelling back to me to run. I just stood there. I guess I was waiting for them to get further away. I knew I could outrun them, and I didn't want one of them to get hurt. I just kept standing there, hoping to stall it or something. I waited longer than I should have, and it came at me quickly, overtaking me as I ran backwards towards the entrance. I could hear the girls screaming somewhere behind me, and I screamed back for them to get help. This thing, so tall it had to stand hunched over to keep from hitting its head on the ceiling of the culvert, towered over me, shrouding me in the heavy mist of its breath and stench of its fur. And it glared down at me. I'm dead, I thought. I stood still and my eyes were closed. My arms and legs were shaking, and I was waiting to become this thing's next meal. And then it made a rattling noise, almost like a coo or a purr. The fear started to subside. I found it in me to start backing away, slowly at first and then a little faster. When I backed far enough, I turned and bolted as fast as I could, and I hit daylight like a runner breaking through a ribbon at the end of the race. The girls were up ahead, scurrying up a rope that we'd used to climb down. I grabbed it and pulled myself to safety. I was frantic to get away from this thing. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. We ran to our parents, hysterically telling them about the culvert, the red eyes, and the 4-legged animal that stood up on 2 feet. "You stay out of that ditch," was all they said. They didn't believe us. Years later, I must have been 13 or 14, it was carnival time in Memphis. The Mid-South Fair was a big deal, and I went every year. A couple of weeks before it started, I checked out a book at the library that was all about the Loch Ness Monster and other cryptids. After my experience, I was fascinated with this subject. In the back of the book was a story and a picture of the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot. My jaw dropped at the sight. Even though I'd been too afraid to look up that day in the culvert, it seemed like this is what I had seen. It made me wonder how many people have ever seen these things, and without any form of reference, they just never knew what they were looking at. That year at the fair, the freak show was boasting one particular exhibit claiming to be a dead Bigfoot on ice. Most people don't remember or maybe even know that until recently as the 1980s, freak shows were a common element of carnivals, fairs, and circuses around the world. These attractions were always fakes, a mix of plaster, makeup, costume, and lighting, designed to extract money from the fairgoer's pocket and nothing else. I had no doubt that the Bigfoot behind this curtain was as fake as the mermaid behind the next. Curiosity got the best of me, though, and I paid for my ticket and I went in to have a look. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was bad. I looked around and I saw others holding their noses. I recognized it. Looking at this thing, I began to reason with myself. It had to be fake. If a man had shot it, he'd be in jail. This thing is just a big hairy humanoid. I focused on the bullet wound visible in its chest. It all looked too real. Well, my time was up and I had to move on. But what I had seen was disturbing. I couldn't forget it. The next year, the fair was back, and I was still obsessed. This year, I brought a magnifying glass with the hope that the Bigfoot exhibit would be there. I was not disappointed. First, I examined the bullet wound. I could clearly see through the ice and the jagged tear where it had entered the creature's chest. It all looked very real. Its skin appeared to have pores. The hairs seemed to sprout from individual follicles. There was dirt under the fingernails and toenails. It was even quite obviously a male. I would pay to see this thing 3 more times that year. The next year it was back, and so was I. This time I'd used a set of medical encyclopedias to familiarize myself with the effects of gunshot wounds, dermal layers, hair growth, and anything else I could learn about anatomy that might prove this to be a fake. On the other hand, I also studied makeup artistry and prosthetics. Again, I paid to see the thing multiple times, and again, I could not find a flaw. Even the fingernails and the toenails had lateral ridges with cuticles. I'm convinced it was real. Hey, this is a Bigfoot story. I'm pretty sure I haven't read all the way through it, but it looked, no, it's not a Bigfoot story. But that's okay, it's a really good story. And if you guys hear a saw in the background, that's my old lady out there doing some carpentry work. She wanted some macaroni and cheese tonight. That's kind of a luxury for her. And I told her, I said, well, if you're going to get macaroni and cheese, you're going to have to do that finished carpentry work inside the house, and so she's busy doing that. But let's get to this story. This occurred in 2005 in Tukwila, Washington, in the mid-spring at 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. I'd like to share this story with you, which to this day still makes me shrink on the inside, wanting to become very small. It only lasted a couple of minutes, but this short event filled me with a heavy, dark feeling of the ultimate end of my existence. I've only shared this with a handful of people, and even then they give me the look of, oh, whatever, with a sideways grin, and this is a familiar reaction to my story. I'm 60 years old now and beginning to understand that if I don't share my experiences, someday they will go to the grave with me, and then no one will have heard them. At this time in my life, ridicule is no longer a concern, so you can believe my story or not. My story starts with me walking to work to begin my night shift at a manufacturing company. My shift was from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I lived 4 blocks from work, and therefore I always walked. I would leave home at 5 p.m. and take my time and enjoy the walk. The walking path I followed ran along the Green River. I was starting at the head of the path with a slight downward incline. It was a beautiful, warm, clear spring day with no wind, and as I was looking ahead, something dark caught my attention from my right and slightly high above the tree line toward the mall, which was 2 blocks in that direction. I turned my head slightly to see. I saw the right profile of it. This creature was black and appeared to be humanoid. It had black wings and legs. It was in the position of a bird that is about to reach down and grab its prey. I turned my attention forward, and I was hit with a feeling of fear. I felt dread as if I were a field mouse in an open area. My mind was telling me that it was a blackbird swooping down, but then another part was saying, "What the hell is this thing?" I turned my head to the right again to look, and there it was in the same spot. It hadn't moved. It looked like a bird, but with legs and arms held slightly out from its body with what looked like a head, not like a bird at all. Its wings were held back in the Lily. Its wings were held back in a position of a bird of prey, and then it was swooping down. My mind was trying to take it all in, and warning signals were going off crazily in my mind, telling me to move slowly and quietly. And at the same time, I was beginning to realize that this thing was hovering in the direction of the shopping mall and a little bit above it. However, that was 2 blocks away. Well, how could I see any of this detail? It is so far away that I should only be able to see a black spot. But finally, I understood that this thing was large. I shifted my gaze forward to determine how much farther until I was down this incline and out of sight, and it was 50 feet away. I looked again to see, and of course, it was still in the same position and giving me that feeling of pure dread. I had no desire to stop and look. All I cared about was getting to work. After a third look, I just focused on getting to the location of not being seen or seeing it. I made it to work early and was still feeling scared. Later in the shift, I shared my experience with a coworker and I received laughter. I shut up after that, and I didn't talk about this for many years. And over the years, I've tried to grasp what I had seen. I honestly don't know. Maybe I don't need to know. Yet even to this very day, when I think about this, the feeling of fear is still present. This writer has a second experience, and here is that one. There was a short incident that happened 4 months later. It was the first part of July, and it was 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I was walking in the parking lot of the same shopping mall as my previous experience. I was halfway across the large parking lot, and I had my headphones on, and I was listening to music. Suddenly, I had the feeling that something was flying above me, and I ducked down, and at the same time, I saw a shadow pass, and it was shaped like a large bird. I could see that it was the shadow of a wing that measured end to end at least 20 feet, but that was a poor guess at best. I immediately stopped and I looked up. There was nothing in the sky except for a few high, white, thin clouds. I looked to see if it was a plane, and there was none. I did a complete 360 looking up, and I still saw nothing. I raced to the entrance, and once again having that feeling of being a field mouse out in the open. I don't know what I saw on those 2 occasions, but I think they may have been related. Whatever it was, it gave me the feeling of being prey, like I was hunted. Well, that about covers the subject, and you can take it for what it's worth. Thank you for your time and for allowing me to share my experiences. One final thought is that I've noticed that people who have had strange encounters seem to be able to check a few boxes off in the crypto or paranormal or even UFO categories. I know that I can check a few of those boxes myself, and all are in the category of, I just don't know what I saw. Oh, very good story. I mean, this guy's like plagued with this huge black winged creature. Maybe it's the Mothman. I don't know much about the Mothman. I see pictures of it, and I think there was a movie, Richard Gere did a movie about it. I've seen advertisements on social media of Mothman festivals. I've never really looked into the Mothman thing, but this could be kind of a Mothman thing, I'm guessing. I mean, What do I know? I have no idea. I just recite these stories, but it kind of sounds like it. Or it could be a pterodactyl. You never know. Pterodactyls, I guess, could exist, and I know there's people out there who think they do. And they might be right. You never know. Thank you to the writer for the story. It was really, really interesting. Here's a story about a Bigfoot in Virginia. This is really good. It's got some interesting twists and a little bit of trivia with it. The writer gives the story a title, The Danville Wild Man, and he actually writes, it's a true experience by Posey Gilbert. Now, I don't know if he's the author or what, but I don't know. But I'm going to read the story. He sent it, so when people send me a story, I assume they want it on the podcast, so that's what I'm doing here. In 1958, my parents and my siblings and I went to visit my grandmother's parents who lived back in the mountains and rolling hills of Danville, Virginia. Whenever it started to get dark, Granny would say, "It's time for y'all to come inside now because the wild man will be coming out soon." How do you like that voice? I'm practicing on doing some voices. Anyway, let's move on. I was 7 then and always imagined a skinny little unshaven cartoon caveman running around in a leopard skin, carrying a big club. I thought it was really just another boogeyman story to keep kids in line. At least that's what my older brother Chuck said it was when I asked him about it. The next day, as she often did, my Aunt Bella, to keep us from underfoot, told her 2 oldest sons, Billy and Jimmy, to take us with them into the woods when they went to gather some firewood. As we scoured the forest floor for kindling and dry broken branches, Billy and Jimmy took to showing us the various wild berries and plants and roots and mushrooms that we could eat, and those that were poisonous and that we should not even touch. We came on a clearing that was surrounded by tall trees, and Jimmy said it would be better if we spread out a bit and looked around. The truth is that this was an adventure for Chuck and I, but this was just another chore for them. Bored, they climbed the 2 giant trees in the clearing, and they watched Chuck and I as we did their work. I was assigned the kindling while Chuck was told to look for the thicker branches. They knew that we wouldn't find anything in that clearing, but that way they could keep us busy and an eye on both of us at the same time. I was getting frustrated because I couldn't find anything, and then I went to the edge of the clearing and I saw that it dropped off onto the lower level. I saw what I thought was a pile of twigs and branches, and I jumped down and I ran over to it, and as I neared the pile, I found myself not standing before a mound of twigs and branches, but in front of what looked like an igloo of woven branches and sticks, or a big upside-down bird nest. I immediately started to call for Chuck, and in a matter of seconds, he and my 2 cousins were standing at the top of the bank. They were all out of breath and pale with worry as they looked down at me. "What the hell are you screaming like that for?" Billy asked. "I thought it was a damn snake had got a hold of you," Jimmy scolded me. They had gotten there so fast it had startled me. They must have started to run toward me when they saw me jump down off the bank. "What did you come down here for anyway?" Chuck asked between gasps. Look what I found," I said happily, pointing to my discovery. I ran over and started to crawl into the opening. "Boy, get your ass out of there," Jimmy screamed to me. "That could be a bear cave." "That ain't no bear cave," I countered. "You can look right through the branches and you can see there's nothing in there." "Yeah, but the bear might be coming back. We need to go," Billy said, ending the conversation. "Let's go. I think we got enough wood anyway." We never spoke about it again after that, but it's like anything strange that happened to me, and it never left my mind. What was that thing and who had built it? For years afterwards, it would cross my mind. And then, last year on Monster Quest, they did a program on what they call the Grass People, or the Grassman of Ohio, which was another name used for Bigfoot-like creatures. I was cooking and not really watching it until they flashed a picture of the thing I found that day out in the woods with Chuck, Billy, and Jimmy. There's also a documentary called Southern Fried Bigfoot, and in it they talk about the fact that Bigfoot has a lot of different names. Boogers, wild man, skunk apes, depending on the locality it is being seen in. but it is all the same or similar creatures. The name they commonly use for it in Virginia is the wild man. In fact, when you enter Danville, there's a sign that says, "Welcome to Danville, home of the Bigfoot." Well, shouldn't that say home of the wild man? If they use wild, I don't know. He gives a link for the Monster Quest Ohio Grassman Part 1 video. I guess it's a YouTube video. And there's also a Monster Quest Ohio Grassman Part 2 Legend of Boggy Creek. Now, how could it be the Ohio Grassman Part 2, the Legend of Boggy Creek? Boggy Creek's in Arkansas. I don't know. There's a few things in there that just kind of confused me. However, the meat of the whole thing was a good story. The shelter that he found, those things don't just build themselves out there in the wild. So it's either a person going out there, I don't know, maybe being creative, or it's some kind of animal that is able to use its hands and actually build a structure, because no other animal, save a monkey, can build those kind of things because they don't have hands and arms to manipulate things. I mean, raccoons do, but they're not strong enough to bend those type of limbs. Let's see, what other animal has hands? Possums kind of do, but I don't know that they use them for manipulating them. I know raccoons do because they clean their food and they feed themselves with their hands. Bears have paws, but they don't really use them to manipulate things. They just use them to capture and climb and stuff like that. Anyway, my mind is just wandering and I'm rambling on. All that to say, this was a great story and I really appreciate the man sending it. Thank you, sir. Thank you for watching the podcast. Mark your calendar for October 20 for the release of Curse of the Wendigo. And a couple of days before that, you will hear the sequel to Barely Dead. And we'll find out what happens to Lindsay as he suffers the ancient native people curse that goes on in that area for killing a man. I'll put an end screen up for Barely Dead now so you can listen to it now. And then the sequel will come out either this weekend, Monday or Tuesday. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.